Welcome to the Broken Graciously podcast, where we challenge the culture of brokenness by exchanging beauty for ashes holistically, with candid conversations, transparency, and practical tips. I'm your host, Tanisha B. Lester, lovingly known as Coach T. I'm a Master Certified Life and Business Coach, Certified Christian Coach, Certified Pastoral Counselor, and published author. I look forward to engaging with you in the comments as well as on IG. Follow me on IG at Tanisha B. Lester with the number 1. Please like and subscribe to this podcast. Welcome to another episode of Broken Graciously. This is episode 9. We are almost at the conclusion of the season. So let's get into it. This week's topic is going to be forgiving self. Last week, just to recap briefly, we talked about forgiving others and how we should give grace to others in situations. And sometimes we may even have to or find ourselves in the position of needing to apologize. So, forgiving self. This is probably what I'm going to say is the absolute most difficult position that we often find ourselves in, which is that of forgiving ourselves, right? If we compare forgiving self versus forgiving others, we'll find that this is the most difficult because most often as individuals, we're always in our own heads. We're our most harshest critics. We are, the ones that give ourselves the most criticism. We are just hard on ourselves versus what anyone else could ever inflict upon us, whether it's harm or criticism, even if it's constructive criticism coming from someone else. We are often worse than anything that anyone else could ever say to us. And that is a problem in and of itself. So, but why do we find it so hard? Like, I know I can speak for me and, others that I've talked to when I say that what I think comes into play is 3 things. I think shame often comes into play. I think blame often comes into play, and guilt. Those are the 3 things that I can readily identify and show that those are the things that we deal with when it comes to forgiving ourselves, right? How many times have you said something, done something, thought something, and then you later on felt shameful about it? No matter what the circumstance was, no matter the reasoning for your thought processes or your speech or like any of those things, your actions, no matter what it is, inevitably on some level you feel shame about it. Let's just look at practically, let's look at from a Christian perspective. If we talk about premarital sex or like any of those things, right? We know as Christians that's something we shouldn't do, but flesh is such that you crave that physical intimacy with another being. And if you have come to a place where, okay, you've decided that you're going to be abstinent and you're going to try to do things the right way, no matter where you are in your Christian walk, then if by chance you happen to fall and, you have intimate relations with another, then there's some shame that comes with that, right? You now feel dirty. You feel, like you need to run and hide from God, from people. Like, there's some shame associated with that. And then it leaks over into the blame category where it's like, oh, man, like I shouldn't have put myself in that position, or I knew if I called that person what it was going to end up being, or I knew the moment the phone rang or that text message, hey big head, good morning beautiful, whatever it was that came through, you knew what was going to be on the other side of it. Yet you found yourself in a vulnerable position and you fell. You slipped up, you backslid, however you want to term it. It happened. Now, in blaming yourself because you feel shameful, you definitely probably aren't going to tell someone else. Your closest friend, you probably won't tell. However, if you find yourself in that position and you do end up telling someone, let me encourage you that there's power in that confession. There's absolute power in confessing and holding ourselves accountable in moments of weakness and moments of vulnerability. Because we're all weak. There are going to be things that you fall short of. Whether it's cigarette smoking and you decide you're going to stop, there's going to be a point where you go ahead and have that cigarette. Whether it's alcohol, there's going to be a point where you go ahead and take that drink. Whether it's you're on a diet, you're going to go ahead and cheat. Whether that cake smells good, that ice cream looks delicious, you're probably going to be tempted. And temptation is just a fact of life. But because we hold ourselves to such a standard, when we have a misstep, it becomes overwhelming. And that's when that blame, shame, and guilt comes into play. You're not the only one. There's plenty of times I've slipped up on a diet, or, I just said, I'm going to fast. And, well, inevitably, Tanisha forgets. And Tanisha will eat that cookie, eat that piece of candy, and, well, there goes that. Every year when we fast for church at the beginning of the year, say I'm going to do it. Now, for the most part, when it comes to me and fasting, I know that there are a couple of proclivities that I have. I have the propensity to not eat all day on a regular basis. So fasting for me strictly from food is not necessarily the key. So I have to find other ways to fast. So that means like no sugar or no television or like things like that where, it's more difficult for me to do. Those are the things that I have to fast from. So in any case where you're vulnerable, you have to absolutely know your propensities. You have to know your propensities and proclivities. What are you subject to? What could be a trigger for you, right? You have to know all of those things in order to keep yourself in alignment for whatever it is you're trying to do. Whether that's, again, abstinence, fasting, refraining from drugs or alcohol or sex or like anything, even if it's something on the positive side, right? Let's look at it from the opposite perspective. Let's say we have decided to journal daily. Let's say we have decided to spend time in prayer or meditation or exercise, like anything of a positive nature. Let's say that is what you're trying to do. But because you can't seem to get over a particular hurdle, you can't seem to get past losing 5 pounds, or you can't seem to get past, praying straight more than 5 days, right? If something happens, you start to feel some type way in your feelings about the fact that you haven't reached that particular goal. And there's nothing wrong with feeling those things. That is merely conviction, and you know that this is something that you should be doing. And that's again where the shame, blame, and guilt comes in, because we feel some type of way and then we begin to turn on ourselves and beat ourselves up. The beating up of self is where the toxicity comes in it. It's where the need for forgiving of self comes into play. But again, we find that difficult. And that may look like you may need to find some accountability. There's nothing wrong with accountability. Again, there's power in the confession. But that's not something that we like to do. We don't like to be vulnerable with others, right? Because, often again, in our heads, we feel like someone is going to judge us. We feel like someone is not going to like us because we have certain proclivities and propensities. But what we don't realize is that while we're in our heads and trying to contemplate or foretell what someone else is thinking about us, they could be thinking the very same thing. How many times have you extended yourself to be vulnerable only to find out that you weren't the only one? Right? That's where the power comes in. Because when you confess to someone else, you most often find out you're not alone in that thing. You're not alone such that you're the only one that has these feelings. You're the only one that has fallen or has been vulnerable, or you're not by yourself. But you'll never know that if you don't confess and share with someone else. You'll never be able to come to a place of forgiving yourself for things, acts, words that you've committed, spoken or said or done, until you can be open and honest with yourself. And I think, again, forgiving self is the absolute hardest thing that you'll ever have to do. However, it is the most powerful, because that's when you can open yourself up. That's when you can open your heart up to learning more about you, to begin to heal and remove the shame of brokenness, and begin to walk into grace. Because here are three things that absolutely needs to happen. Number one, you have got to be honest with yourself. Lying to yourself is never going to lead you to a place of forgiving yourself. Because if you're lying to yourself, then you're lying to others. And lying to others isn't as important as lying to yourself. Lying to yourself holds more weight. It absolutely holds more weight. So you have to be in a place where you can be honest and open with yourself. When you can be honest and open with yourself, then you can begin to step into number two, which is recognizing your role in whatever it is that you're playing. Whether that's in the role of, an argument with another, or, just in your space of self, learning yourself, growing yourself, moving in and evolving. You can't move and evolve if you can't forgive yourself, if you can't recognize your wrongs, if you can't be open and honest with yourself. Then you want to be able to give yourself grace. That's the third tip. You have to be more careful, more gracious, more loving with yourself. Because if you're that hard on yourself about whatever the situation is, how can you expect someone else to give you grace when you're not even willing to give yourself grace? First of all, if you're not willing to accept grace for yourself, you can't accept the grace of another. The grace of another can lead you to healing, but self-grace, that's a whole nother ball game right there. Because we have to be more careful with ourselves. We have to be more loving and patient with ourselves. I'll be the first to tell you, yes, I am my harshest critic. I'll be the first to tell you, yes, I have a hard time forgiving myself. And sometimes I have to sit myself down and have a conversation with myself, because I know that it's necessary. I know that it's powerful. I know that it's healing. But when I'm in my head, I fail to see all of those things. So I have to get out of myself, step outside of myself to be able to do any of this. And I encourage you to do the same. Because when you can recognize your role, when you can get out of your own way, when you can give yourself grace, right? When you can do all of that, that's when you can begin to forgive yourself, no matter what it is that you've done. That's when your power becomes strong. That's when your brokenness becomes gracious. So, again, No matter what you've done, no matter what position you've found yourself in, where you have recognized and realized that you have a hard time forgiving yourself, I want you to give yourself grace today. I want you to go look yourself in the mirror. And I mean, really look yourself in the mirror. Look yourself dead in the eye, square on, and tell yourself, I forgive you. No matter what you have done, I love you and I forgive you. I give you grace. I extend compassion and acceptance. That is your power statement right there. That is the most practical tip that I could give you today. So again, remember to give yourself grace and remember to give yourself or extend forgiveness to yourself first and above all else. Again, this has been episode 9 of Broken Graciously, where we challenge the culture of brokenness by exchanging beauty for ashes holistically with candid conversations, transparency, and practical tips. Next week, again, is our last episode of the season. We will be taking a break and we will resume in July with more topics. And I'm bringing guests on this time. So stay tuned. Be sure to like and follow the podcast. Hey, and even invite somebody to come watch and listen along with you. All right. I will talk to you next week.